All right, Scott, I believe everybody can see my screen now.
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Excellent. Thanks everyone for joining us today, and appreciate everybody sending me the emails already on your CCA number. There's my email address if you are a CCA and you want your CEUs. Just shoot me an email. We have applied for them, and as soon as the webinar is done, I will be sending in all the names and numbers so you guys can get your CEUs. If you missed my email address, it is at the end of the presentation as well. So today's agenda, we're going to be, I'll introduce myself a little bit more. Scott gave you a very brief introduction of myself. Going to talk about how we measure and validate literally everything. One of the things that popped up in the poll there was confidence about are we making the right decisions. So we're going to talk a little bit about how we validate things. And then we're going to hop right into the really cool insights. We did a bunch of variable rate seeding on wheat this past year, so we're going to share about that. For the last 2 years, we've been working on understanding phosphorus placed with the seed, specifically MAP, a little bit of MES from the Mosaic company. Combined with that is some interesting stuff that we've been doing on sulfur. We also have some interesting things to share with you on spring potash, as well as a couple trials of boron. And to wrap it up with the wheat is a little bit of fungicides. And then, like Scott mentioned, there's going to be a Q&A at the end. So my background, this is where Chatham-Kent is. It's about as far south in Canada as you can get. So I'm about an hour outside of Detroit, Michigan. So not your typical Canadian living in the prairies talking about wheat. This part of Canada, we grow primarily winter wheat. So when you hear us talking about the results, all of the data that I'm going to be sharing with you is from winter wheat. And that doesn't mean it can't be applied to spring wheat, durum, different things like that. But I'll share also some thoughts on what we should be doing to carry that information over onto those other crops. I obtained my Bachelor of Science Agriculture in 2001, so I've been kicking around the industry. I guess this is my 20th year. I obtained my Certified Crop Advisor designation in 2003. My first 10 years in the industry, I was in ag retail. So from what Scott's told me, there's a bunch of ag retail folk sitting in on this as well. And then for the last 10 years, I've been more heavily involved in consulting agronomy. Started off more as pure agronomy, then moved into more of the precision ag side. Through my career, this part of Ontario has a lot of different crops, a lot of different vegetable crops. So I've had the opportunity to work with 43 different types of crop. It was 42, but with the introduction of hemp, I can now claim 43. So that's me. On to the good stuff. Wanted to share this with you. A lot of people are curious why we do these webinars, and it comes down to the Deveron value proposition. We did a little presentation at a Develop with Deere conference, and we asked everyone, so this was all of the John Deere dealers across North America, to participate in a poll similar to what you guys got to do, that generated a word cloud. And what we asked was, what is limiting the uptake of precision ag? So this is all the John Deere dealers and all of the John Deere dealer experts on precision ag. So you can see where the issue, it's time, it's knowledge, return on investment, ease of use. These are things that they are hearing from their customers. So I love sharing this slide because this covers just about everything that people get very frustrated with on precision ag. So our value proposition is to try to address as many of these issues as possible with our clients and with our partners. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that. So this is how we view technology. I stole this from a good friend of mine who is an engineer. And apparently engineers love diagrams. So I like this one when he posted it on Facebook. I love the terminology, the peak of inflated expectations. the trough of disillusionment. That would describe a lot of things that I've experienced in the precision ag space. It really feels like there's a lot of solutions being created, and we just need to find the problem that that solution is going to work for. So this is what we look at from Deveron, and that is when we look at precision ag, you have the innovators. Maybe there's some innovators on this call right now. These are the folks that are coming up with incredibly new concepts, new ideas, and it's absolutely fascinating to see what they're coming up with. And it just blows my imagination every time I see something new come out. I'm like, wow, that is absolutely incredible to be thinking about it. Then the next section I describe, I'm not sure if you guys can see my mouse, but is the early adopters, right? They're right after the innovators. These guys, they want to try everything that's new. And I'll be honest with you, this is where a lot of the precision ag space lives. A lot of new stuff is constantly coming out, and people are always wanting to try the newest thing. It's hard to actually get things gaining traction, because without completing one evaluation cycle, early adopters are on to the next thing right away. Then we've got this thing called a chasm risk, or a chasm gap. And this is a real thing. Trying to get the early mass, the leading edge, the pragmatists, whatever you want to call them. I call them the early majority. This is like 35% of the marketplace. These are your great, big, huge customers that are looking at this technology going, if that works, I want in on it, because that's going to make me a lot of money. These guys have gotten big because they have taken very smart, calculated risks. They're not willing to jump on every new thing, but as soon as they feel relatively confident that something's going to work for them, they are willing to take that calculated risk. And so because of that, these guys are big, big farmers. And so this is the market area that Deveron quite often wants to focus on. Yes, we do get into play in the innovators. I've got a bunch of folks in my data insights group that just love to play with new stuff, and I'm guilty of it as well. And then there's a bunch of us in the company that, we probably fall into the early adopters as well, because we're constantly getting to see the newest, greatest things coming out. But our market, our strategy is to go after this early market, this early majority, because that is where you're going to have huge uptake. This is why AutoSteer had took off. This is why, like, when you look at the technology, why Roundup Ready technology took off. This was the section that adapted it. If you can't jump that chasm risk or chasm gap, your technology or your concept is going to, for lack of a better term, flounder, or really struggle until you can get across that gap. So when we're working with partners, what we're doing is we're looking at how we can adapt to this early majority. This is kind of our philosophy. We have a whole bunch of different tools. I'm not going to go through all of them, but the whole idea is to answer the so what around this technology. Did it make money? So we look at each farm as being unique. We want to measure that value. We want to work very collaboratively. So we want to work with everyone that is touching that farm. And as such, we do work directly with a few farmers, but the vast majority of our business is done through our partner network, our affiliates, that we work with together. And if you're interested in with some of the stuff that I'm showing, going, hey, we'd really like to utilize those tools in our business, maybe some of them, maybe all of them, completely up to you. I would strongly encourage you to reach out to myself, to Scott, to the rest of our sales team, and we'll have the conversation about which tools you want to be able to utilize for your team. So, validation. I believe this quote actually comes from Peter Drucker, who was a management consultant. Basically, the quote is, if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. So this is how one of our major approaches when it comes to being able to validate data. We take our variable rate prescriptions and we turn them into a complete randomized block design. So those of you who remember your stats lessons from university, this is a great way to make sure that you have really good statistical analysis. It allows you to have multiple reps. It allows you to have a very good, a very small confidence interval. It allows you to test some really cool stuff. For example, this particular field, this is one of my dad's. It's a cornfield, and my dad loves to push the envelope. He grows corn on 20-inch centers, and he really wanted to push the yield, and he felt that it could be done through population. So you can see those little squares. Those little squares are 120 feet by 120 feet, and the pink ones, he's got all the way up to 40,000 plants per acre. Now this is dry land corn. This is not irrigated, and come this fall when it was time to harvest, we had a few squares that were exactly 120 feet by 120 feet that were completely flat. I will tell you, farmers are not happy when you have a big chunk of their field go flat. But when you can have a little check square like that, about 1/3 of an acre, and randomized throughout the field, and you can show that that is the only area that's damaged, Dad was able to quickly understand that, okay, 40,000 is a bit much, at least with the current genetics. So this tool you're going to see throughout the day. Now, when you analyze the data, there's a lot of software out there. This is AgLeader's SMS example, and it can pull a giant table of data that you can take a look at. And if you're like me and you love looking at numbers, you can look at this stuff all day long and you get really excited. Realistically, though, that's a lot of numbers, and you're going to find data points that contradict each other in that table. So what we've done is we are using a stats platform, and it's called R. And I have no problem sharing the stats program because R is a computer language-based stats program. It's not as simple as click a couple buttons. You actually do have to write some pretty intensive computer code to be able to get something like this. This is a response curve. I really like the response curve because this it not only tells you how much you made by changing the seeding rate. So if you had a flat rate of, say, something here right in the middle and going to either side, you can see, okay, this is how much variable rate actually made me. But it can actually tell you what is the optimum rate as well. So not only are you looking in the rearview mirror of, did I make more money, or in some cases, how much money did I lose? But you're also learning, okay, what else can I do to learn from that? So it's looking both in the rearview mirror as well as looking forward. Just one small detail on these curves. The shaded areas, that is what we call the confidence interval. So the more data points you have, the narrower that confidence interval is. So the stuff way out where it's super wide, I would caution you to be around how much data you want or how much insights you want to draw from that. It's the dark line in the middle that we use for calculations. All right, on to wheat. Like I said, this is winter wheat. First one up we're going to talk about is variable rate seeded wheat. So the first case that I'm going to share with you, I'm not going to, good news, I'm not going to share every case. I've picked a bunch of cases with a bunch of different scenarios, and I've also included some summaries. So this first case, this is a grower that I would describe as being an intensive manager of his wheat crop. And when you start seeing his some yields, you'll probably understand why I feel that. It's not uncommon for this grower to be producing 110 to 140 bushels per acre as a field average. So he's pretty intensive. Multiple passes in the spring with different fertilizer. He quite often puts on ammonium sulfate early on, then with 28%, and then he comes back with the metis, I believe a urea and ammonium sulfate mix. At least one fungicide, probably a growth regulator in as well. So you can see this is the seeding map. You can see our check blocks scattered throughout of all the different rates. One thing to mention about this particular grower, you can see the headlands here. We've gone a little heavier rate. And the reason for the heavier rate is because of his management practices. The headlands are going to see a nice bit of tramping. He wants a little bit more population there. After careful consideration, what we decided to use as an approach for wheat was the higher rates, these green areas, are based on where the lower productivity is expected. So we're putting more seed down where the wheat we feel is going to struggle, and then less wheat where we feel that the wheat is going to yield better. So that's the philosophy that we took on this. Here is the actual yield data from this past year. So you can see we captured the zones fairly accurately. Everybody's got their own philosophy on how to create zones. I tend to weight fairly heavily towards known, what I call known yield data. I'm hesitant on some other data layers, and even with the yield data. If I'm going to be using yield data, I want to make sure I understand the story behind that yield data. If it's yield data from a corn crop that was planted 2 months late, that's maybe not the yield data that I want. And in our part of the world, that was something that we had in 2019. So 2019 yield data is probably not our favorite yield data to be working with. When you get into creating these management zones, my rule of thumb is when the farmer looks at it, the farmer has to say, yes, that makes sense. If the farmer looks at it and goes, no, that's not how that field works, please don't use those management zones. Our experience is if you use poor management zones, you will lose more doing variable rate or precision ag than you will ever make using good zones. So making sure you've got good zones up front is very, very important. And there's a bunch of different ways. Like I said, my preferred one is good yield data. So this was the intensive management one. You can see here's our response curves. There is his target seeding rates that we plugged in there. This particular seed lot was a very small seed. I want to say it was something like 13 or 14, actually it was close to 15,000 seeds per pound. So it was very small seed. So ranging anywhere from about 1.4 million to about 1.9 million seeds per acre. And you can see the higher yield in the, and we actually are using an economics. So that's dollars per acre returned. And you can see the high yielding zone area, that optimum planting population. We actually did have to bump it. Those were the initial target rates based on, like I said, that 15,000 seeds per acre. The challenge he ran into, I think he called me in the middle of the night and said, we ran out of that seed lot. Can you recut it? He was actually using a John Deere monitor, so it made it very easy for him just to tweak the rates right in his monitor. But you can see that about 125 pounds per acre was the sweet spot for the high yielding area. Probably about 135 for the next zone, maybe 137, kind of close. And that lower productivity zone, even that didn't need a super high population. Here is another one of the growers that I do some work with. I would describe this as low impact management. This individual, wheat is not his priority. He's a fairly large livestock farmer, so he's more interested. Obviously, yield's important, but he's also interested in straw as well as the animals in the barn. So you can see the management zone on the left and the yield on the right. If you're curious as to what's going up here in the top corner, this particular field, you can see a couple little laneways throughout here. They've been building wind turbines on this part of the world, and this was actually a staging area for the wind turbine construction. So we have a nice bit of compaction going on there. So this one, now if you look at all four of those zones, they tend to layer right on top of each other, just about bang on. There is not a whole lot of variance as far as changing the population. And you can see dollars per acre is significantly less too. Not a wheat guy. So 2019, planted in 2019, seeded in 2019 if you're from Western Canada. Harvested in the summer of 2020. We did this on 23 different fields. So for about 3,700 acres, or well, you guys can read it, 3,752 acres. I split it out about 50-50, what I would describe as my high management fields and my low management fields. You can see the high management, the intensive management, about $17.50 per acre was the net return. The low impact management, $1.38. Not really sure if I'd be getting excited about $1.38. I know margins are tight in agriculture, but that's pretty skinny. $17.50. All right, you got my attention. Next, so that's variable rate seeded wheat. Next, phosphorus with seed. This has been something that's really taken off. I'm going to say the last 10 years with the adoption of commodity carts and air seeders in this part of the world. Prior to that, a lot of box drills or CCS drills with the tanks built into the drill, and we really couldn't test a whole lot of what was going on with placing seed-placed phosphorus. So, for the most part, what we're talking about is MAP in with the seed. So you can see in this particular example that I've shared, we have a plateau at around 100 pounds per acre, and then it jumps up to about 125 and continues to climb to 150. Now, you could sit there and look at it and go, oh, wow, I need to be planting all at 150 or use 150 pounds of MAP in order to maximize my yield. What we've started to do is we've started to look at it based also off of soil test levels. So how is the rate or the response to the MAP based on soil tests? So now you're starting to overlay data layers. You're starting to look at those management zones, also not just for seeding, but even how much fertilizer you can put down. So you can see in this particular case that in that 50 to 75 pounds of MAP, so this is the low rate of MAP, and you can see in this particular field, we got incredibly low phosphorus levels. In this part of the world, we use the Olsen test, also known as the bicarb test for phosphorus. You can use whichever phosphorus test you want to use for this. What we are finding is that when you've got really, really low levels of phosphorus, it really doesn't matter how much you put down. Even 50 pounds is going to help you out. Quite often what we see is when we get into these super low soil test levels, that there's other things going on. So going and dumping on a whole bunch more phosphorus, a whole bunch more MAP on a low testing phosphorus soil, a little bit's going to help. But there's probably something else limiting. So having to look at everything that's going on, and I'll share some more examples as we go through today. But you can see as your phosphorus levels start to get a little bit higher, all the way up to 15, still, I would admit these are still pretty low. You can see that these curves are starting to curl back up. So when you get up to these higher testing levels, now you're starting to need to put down more MAP in order to get the response. Like I said, this is just one example that I'm sharing. So this is based off of the last 3 years, about 12,000 acres. Like I said, if you've got very low phosphorus levels, and I'm going to leave that up to you guys to decide what you consider to be very low levels of phosphorus, even a little extra phosphorus goes a very, very long way. The medium phosphorus levels, you need to start to ramp up the rates. Like I said, our experience has been about 125 pounds of MAP is usually the sweet spot for your medium phosphorus levels. On the high testing phosphorus levels, so for us, this is anything north of about 35, 40 parts per million, like I said, Olsen test. It's pretty hard for us to ever get a response to phosphorus. We're seeing other things. Now, there's always an exception. The great thing about seeing all of this data, I get my hypothesis challenged on a regular basis, and that's a good thing because it means I get to rework my hypotheses, or whatever the plural for a hypothesis is. So next, sulfur. This trial came out of an observation that I had in 2019 around elemental sulfur in with the seed. And what we did, you can see this trial, the green strips, we added 30 pounds of elemental sulfur in with the seed, in with the map. And then the red strips, there was no elemental sulfur. Now, you're going to ask, well, why did you do strips? Well, the reason was because the grower wasn't completely convinced that this was going to offer more yield. So what we wanted to do was to put randomized check blocks throughout the field in order to be able to test other sulfur sources. So the first slide there, the first picture there, that was elemental sulfur. This next picture, this is spring ammonium sulfate. So this is dry, 80 pounds per acre is the green, and then the red is 0. Now, challenge when you do this is ammonium sulfate, dry, is 21% nitrogen. So if you put an extra 80 pounds of this down, that's 16 pounds of nitrogen. So are you testing sulfur or are you testing nitrogen? Well, we wanted to eliminate that extra variable. So we threw another prescription in on things, and that's the exact opposite to that one. And this is a 28% script, and 2 different rates of nitrogen with the idea that those green blocks complement that extra amount of nitrogen that's needed to bring that back up from the missed ammonium sulfate. Here's the picture that we took using one of our drones. I'm going to say it was about the middle of May, and some interesting things are going on here. One, nobody's going to be able to find those strips in there. If you can, you've got a better imagination than I have. Number 2, you got to look really, really hard and have a really, really good imagination to even find some of these check blocks in there. Are some of them there? Yeah, they are there. We've looked, we have been able to identify them, but there's a couple other things happening here. One, if you see this darker green area right here, the farmer, this is where he calibrated his application of ammonium sulfate, this AMS, with his spreader. So this got a whack load more nitrogen. So we actually had to remove that data from the analysis. The next piece, this very distinct line, as soon as I seen it, I was like, okay, something's going on there. We went back and looked at the planting data. This is a 1 week difference in planting data. So once again, we've had to separate this data out to make sure that it's nice and clean when we're looking at it. We're not getting that data contamination. This field's about a 350 acre field, to give you an idea. We also added in some soil test data. This is one approach that we use for soil testing, and that is creating soil testing zones and then sampling those zones. I'm not a real big fan of doing grid sampling or bulk sampling, so we actually do, I prefer to work with zone samples. The data collection folks, if you do work with them, and if you want to stick with grids or bulk sampling, they are happy to work with you on that. If you want to get into more detailed stuff like this, they're willing to support you that way as well. So this is the bulk sampling. I'm not going to get much into this next map. I believe we've got a webinar scheduled for next week. I'm looking at some more intensive soil sampling approaches. Talking exactly like I said about the zones versus the blocks. This is a soil scanning technology called soil optics, and you can see the organic matter and how much variability you're capturing and whatnot. I just wanted to share that because of some of the additional analysis that I'm going to be throwing at you guys. By the way, if you haven't figured it out yet, I really love data. I'm a numbers guy. So here is a box and whisker plot. Not going to go into great detail about how box and whisker plots set up. Those of you who like them know what they are. Those of you who have no idea, I'll try at my best to explain what you're seeing. But what you can see is we did split the data out by day 1 versus day 2. And this was the 2 different plantings. You can see the orange, there's no sulfur down. Green is only fall sulfur. Spring is blue is this spring sulfur, and purple is spring and fall. I'll tell you right now, there is the only statistical difference that you are going to see between these treatments. Like I said, pretty hard to find those blocks. The only statistical difference you're going to be able to find in the yield, this is yield, this is not that image, in the yield is going to be between the 2 different days of planting. There is a statistical difference in yield between planting date. There is no statistical difference between all these different treatments in this particular field. What we did do was we took it a little bit further, and we went and took a peek at what else was going on. So remember, I shared with you the soil test data. No difference in yield when you took a look at the entire field. But when I started to split it out by soil type, I did start to find some interesting things. One was around organic matter. This farmer has done a nice bit of work with manure, so his organic matter levels are pretty good. I would ask for a show of hands how many people would love an average of 4% organic matter, but I can't see you guys, so I'm just going to assume everybody's putting their hand up right now. But you can see down here in this lower productivity zone, the spring, or not lower productivity necessarily, this lower organic matter, this spring sulfur is benefiting. And another interesting thing, and we'll talk about this a little bit more, is in this high organic matter. Now you can see, I'm not sure how much confidence I'd put into it, because that confidence interval is getting pretty wide up there. So I probably wouldn't put too much weight into it, but you can see there is maybe something going there, maybe. A bit of a stretch if you ask me. So we also looked at CEC, because the thinking that I had was sulfur being an anion, maybe it's leaching out. And we couldn't find the same thing going on with the CEC. It should have been the low CECs that were responding better. Not the case. If anything, once again, the confidence intervals get a little wide, but you might be able to make an argument it's actually in the heavier soil. But here's the interesting thing. That organic matter is mineralizing sulfur. So I think it's more, I believe from this data that we're seeing, is that the mineralization of sulfur from organic matter is actually tied more than the CEC. So sulfur, I'm going to give my nod. If you're dealing with some lower organic matter, spring sulfur application is probably getting to be pretty important. This part of Ontario, we are considered we get a nice bit of, or have historically gotten a nice bit of sulfur from the coal-fire plants through the Ohio Valley, and with clean coal, that just doesn't happen nearly as much. So we're starting to see more and more sulfur deficiencies, and based on this data, where it's showing up in fields and which fields it's showing up in, is it's the low organic matter fields and the low organic matter areas, more so than the low CEC. Now, I'm going to put a little bit of a pin on that one, because the lowest CEC that I'm really dealing with in this field is 14. If I was dealing with a true sand of, say, 6, 7 CEC, it might be different. And if you've got a soil of 6, 7 CEC, you want to challenge me on this, I would love to work with you. We're starting to get ready to plant winter wheat or even spring wheat. If we want to challenge that and take a deeper look, that would be a lot of fun to work with you on. So in this past year, I showed you the more extensive one. We made it pretty simple for a bunch of other guys, but we tested 14 fields overall. About 1,500 acres, and like I said, a stronger correlation to organic matter than to the low CEC. I don't get to work with a whole lot of sand and wheat. Those two usually don't mix that often in our part of the world. Now, in 2019, I had a chance to look at a whole bunch of data around sulfur and phosphorus, and I came up with a hypothesis. I felt that what I was seeing, because I had this one fairly large grower that insisted on adding elemental sulfur to his MAP. His optimum rate for MAP was about 25 to between 25 and 40 pounds less than everyone else. Everyone else seemed to be about 110 to about 130, and he was consistently right around that 75 to 80 pounds of MAP was the sweet spot for him. But he was always putting in about 20 pounds of elemental sulfur. So it got me curious to be able to test this out. So what we did was we put a whole bunch, we've got a couple guys that have 3-bin commodity cards. So one bin is for seed, one bin is for MAP, and the third bin is for elemental sulfur in this case. And here's what we found is by turning on and off that 20 pounds of elemental sulfur, you can see there's not a whole lot of increase, whether the sulfur's, well, you're going to see that there's an increase from the sulfur being there. But the rate of the sulfur was not what was driving it. What was driving it was whether it was there at all. So once that sulfur was there, the phosphorus seemed to be doing a better job. It seemed to be giving us a bigger yield. So looks to be 11 bushel increase in this case. Overall, it's probably the average is closer to 7 bushels per acre, but this is something we have consistently been seeing in our data from 2020. Spring potash. Okay, you don't have to be a rocket scientist to look at this curve to realize that spring potash doesn't look like a real hot idea. Kind of flat from 0 to about 200. Anything above 200, it tails off pretty quick. And when you look at the data, so this we split it out looking at 0 and 150 pounds to look at the difference. Those curves basically lay on top of each other. Now this is one particular field, and in total we did 3 fields. 2 of those fields look exactly like what I'm showing you right here. There was very, very little evidence that there was anything going on. One field did show a response. And where it was showing was where the potash was very, very low. So only 3 fields, kind of limited on data here, guys, but there is a possibility something's going on. Originally, the thinking around putting the potash on was it was a chloride source. There's some thoughts that maybe chloride helps on disease management in wheat. This was one of my intensive wheat farmers that wanted to test this out. So I take my cue from what we're going to be testing from a lot of partners and clients. What are they interested in? So I'll tell you right now, this keeps me employed for next year. This year, one of the big things that they want to be testing is copper with the seed fertilizer. So that's going to be an interesting one. Anyway, on to boron. Also, one of my intensive managed wheat farmers, and he really was getting excited about boron. He had been reading a bunch of stuff about boron, wanted to test it. So we went out, and lo and behold, we got a response. He did a few fields. You can see he did 4 fields, just shy of 300 acres. On average, about 3.5 bushel increase. Interesting thing is with boron, not much of a difference whether the boron was there or not as the CEC got a little bit lower, which was counterintuitive to what we thought, because just like with sulfur, with it leaching on a sandy soil, we thought it would be the lower CECs. Once again, a CEC of 10, yeah, that's a little bit on the light side, but it is not a true sand. Meanwhile, if you look at in this case, it's the base saturation of potassium, you can see that there is a gap. Where the available potassium is lower, the boron is helping. And that is something that we would tend to agree with. So a couple other correlations that we've noticed, like I said, 4 fields, so, but all 4 fields are complete randomized block designs. So there does seem to be a strong correlation to the percent base saturation of potassium. And this one blew me away. There was a positive correlation to higher zinc levels. So if you had a zinc level of over 4 parts per million, boron seemed to do a little bit better. Now, if there's a plant physiologist on this webinar right now, please shoot me an email and explain that to me, because I'd be fascinated to understand how those two correlate so nicely. Because here's the kicker. the boron soil test was not a good predictor. We did have boron soil tests for this field, and it didn't really show any strong correlation whatsoever. But zinc and base saturation of K, you better believe it did. Final one. Hopefully I haven't put anyone to sleep just yet. And luckily, Scott has you all muted, so I can't hear you snoring anyway. So fungicides. Everybody in this part of the world loves to spray fungicides on their wheat. We're close to the Great Lakes, so we quite often get hit with fusarium, which messes with quality. So fungicides are kind of a go-to situation. I'm just going to identify these two fungicides as product A, product B. One of them is a fairly new product on the market in this area. And so the grower was interested to understand if there was any difference. Box and whisker plot, there is no statistical difference between product A and product B. When you looked at it across the field in a randomized block design, we could not get a response that was statistically significant. If you cherry pick the data a little bit, yeah, you could find a pretty good difference. There was no doubt that the new product, the wheat was a lot cleaner. It looks like a late disease, late flush of septoria or alternaria came in and turned the wheat black, basically. This new product did a really good job of preventing that, but wasn't a slam dunk on increasing the yield. But what we did do was we took a look at how the product did based on soil test. And we took a look at all of them, and I'm just going to share with you a couple. One of them is the bicarb, like I said, the soil bicarb. This is our phosphorus test. This is the Olsen test that we work with here. And then the other one was CEC. Now, the phosphorus test, I thought might be a way to predict it because I was thinking, okay, more phosphorus, that's going to be where the growth through wheat is. Maybe we'll have a response. Not really. But what was interesting was CEC. You can see product A really starts to take off as you get into the heavier ground. So this is kind of interesting. Limited data, I think 2 fields if memory serves me. So you can't draw a definitive conclusion, but I'm getting curious if maybe we should be checking our fungicide efficacy based on soil test levels. So that's something else that we are going to be exploring a little bit heavier in 2021. All right, so conclusions. Test everything. If you don't believe me that I test everything, you definitely were asleep during that presentation because I love to test. Now, when you do test, you do have to be careful of biases. If you're not aware of what your biases are, have someone take a look at the data and say, did I set up my trial right and did it actually make sense? Look for the interactions. Like I said, that sulfur phosphorus one was something that I noticed in 2019. Now we're starting to see fungicide by CEC. Looking for those interactions, I think that's going to become more and more important. And beware of outlier data points, right? Like if you remember where that area of the one field was, that the windmill turbines, yeah, you have to kick that data out. Don't be kicking out data that you don't like, but kick out data that doesn't make any sense on both sides of the spectrum. Variable rate seeded wheat, it looks promising, but it has to be part of an intensive management program, at least at this point. It's not just do that one thing and everything else is going to work. The response to the various fertility programs, whether it's sulfur, phosphorus, potassium, or boron, I'm going to lump them all together and say that they're management zone dependent. If you're not soil testing, you're basically throwing spaghetti at the kitchen wall and hoping something sticks. You need to be soil testing in order to start to predict where you're going to get the biggest bang for your buck. And along with the fungicide is that it is a possibility that certain fungicides work better based on different soil test levels. And with that, that is everything I've got. There's my email address again. If you didn't get it before and need to send me an email to get your CEUs. With that, Scott, are you kicking around there, sir?
I am. Thanks, Aaron.
Perfect.
We appreciate everything you've shown us today. It's a very good roll up and explanation of this subset of work we've done over this year, and particularly focusing in on winter wheat. It's quite timely, just as you got done with the harvest and straight into the data insights, and now this is going to go back to the clients to help improve their production decisions for next year. So I mean, that's the whole goal of this. We all know that the data layers just keep coming, right? More data keeps coming every year. So as opposed to just gathering data, our goal is to, what Aaron has shown is we're gathering that data, but then doing something with it. So the clients then will get recommendations back to how to make adjustments. So here at Deveron, we've really got a kind of an underlying philosophy that every field has a variability. And you've done a great job, Aaron, of showing us over several fields how every field does indeed have variability. If there's any doubt that there's variability in fields, you can just continuously show it by every field we look at. And because of that, really we're trying to help our clients monetize variability, and to do that, increase adoption rate of precision ag. We show everybody what we do. I mean, as we show everybody what to do, you can do it yourself or you can call us, but whatever it is, through our education, we're just trying to increase the precision ag pie. We're not trying to make it smaller. We're trying to get more people to adopt precision ag, which increases productivity, increases sustainability, optimizes inputs. So Aaron, I appreciate it. With that, I'm going to hand it over to I'm going to turn it over to the question and answer session. If you've got questions that you've been thinking about, as Aaron discussed what he observed through this last winter wheat harvest, please go over to the Q&A session and type your questions in there, because I'll see them. And if you just move your mouse around, it's either going to be on the top or the bottom, depends on how you have your screen set up. You'll see a button there that says Q&A, and just open that up and go ahead and type in what your questions are. I've already got 2 I see in here already, and we'll jump over to that. The first question, Aaron, comes from Darwin Edgar, which he asks, will using higher rates of MAP start to lower the pH levels, and would that be detrimental?
Interesting question, Darwin. So the soils that we work with have a very high buffering capacity. So in our part of the world, MAP has not lowered the pH. And in fact, quite often, our pHs are usually between a 6.7 all the way up to a 7.6, 7.7. I know that's probably still a little low for some folks, especially Western Canada, that can get into some 8s. So if anything, we do want the pH brought down a little bit. It's one of the theories as to what's going on with that sulfur-phosphorus interaction, is that elemental sulfur, as it converts to sulfate, it is actually lowering the pH. Just chemistry geek observation, people will often say it's always sulfur that lowers the pH. In the case of ammonium sulfate, it's not the sulfur that's lowering the pH, it's actually the ammonium in that particular case. So I have not seen a decrease from straight MAP, at least not at that 150-pound range. We do a bunch of other things to try to lower that pH, including elemental sulfur, like I said, and actually when we're working with corn, we'll add ammonium sulfate. Not for we do get the benefit from the sulfur, but the ammonium part is actually lowering the pH because that's something we want.
Excellent, thanks. Next question we have is from John. John asks, in reference to the sulfur and MAP interaction, do you have any recollection of some of these fields and what the soil pH was?
Great question. I'm going to put an average of, call it an average of about 7.1, 7.2. I think the low end would have been probably 6.1, 6.2. That would have been a zone within a field. And then the high end would have been about a 7.7 or a 7.8. So like I said, all tending towards a little bit on the heavier side. And because phosphorus is tied to pH, I'm guessing that's where John's going with it. Some other information about our soil tests. Aluminum levels for us tend to be between 600 and 1,000 for the majority of what we work with. And let's see, calcium's probably going to be in that 3,000 to 4,000 ppm. And our part of the world, we're lucky we do not run into iron deficiencies. I am aware that that can also be a little bit of an issue, but we do tend to have a nice bit of iron in our soil as well.
Yeah, thanks, Aaron. I still have 2 questions left, and we're going to get through those. If you do have questions and you don't have them typed in yet, go ahead and do so before I get done here. The next question comes from Laura. Laura Keith says, have you applied tissue testing to add another data layer yet?
Short answer on wheat, no. Would I like to? Oh, yes, I would. Scott had mentioned he's in Kansas City. I'm in Ontario, Canada. We actually, I'm not sure if he's on right now, but we actually have a colleague in the panhandle of Texas that does a bunch of stuff with irrigated corn, and he's got a huge data set that we're going to be grinding through this winter, more on the corn side, but it includes soil test levels, yield data, and tissue test data throughout the season. And I've got some really interesting hypotheses around phosphorus and nitrogen utilization, but it's just a hypothesis. It's not even based on a lot of observational data. It's just a little bit of observational data. So Scott, I guess that's my suggestion to Laura, to keep an eye on her email, and come maybe February, March, I'm going to have some really cool stuff to share about tissue testing. Great.
Look forward to that. And then, as I said, we're getting low on questions. If you have any more, get it in. But as of right now, it looks like I've got the last question to answer. It comes from an anonymous attendee. Oh, here we got an extra one. But still going to anonymous attendee, so we got 2 more questions now. Do you see any differences in test weights on some of your trials?
I'm just trying to think of my data. Well, anonymous, I don't believe I've actually pulled a data test layer around test weights. So I'm going to say I have not observed anything yet, but I also have not looked. So that's a great question. One of the things on my wish list is there are some aftermarket yield monitors that are able to measure protein. And I am very keen to work with some technology on that front to be able to understand how some of these different treatments might be impacting the protein content of the grain. Great question.
Yeah, I got some good questions today. And then the last question so far is coming from Darwin. Would you recommend, we got another one. This is good. Would you recommend using, you got 2 more now. Would you recommend using crop removal or soil test data for fertilizer rates? Would you recommend crop removal or soil test data for fertilizer rates?
So as all good agronomists are going to answer at this point, the answer is it depends. Darwin, great question. Way to put me on the spot. So why I say it depends, there's a few things that I'm going to be looking at with that. Generally, if I've got good soil test data, but good soil test data, what I'm talking about is for my opinion, at least at that 5-acre zone that I showed you, or that soil scanning technology that you've got a really good handle on things, I'm probably going to lean more towards a soil test recommendation and to base it off of that. If I don't have that good soil test data, like very detailed soil test data, I am going to lean more towards crop removal because that's going to give me a better defined area for me to understand what's going on. Yeah, that would be my initial approach. Another big piece that's going to come into the conversation for me, I didn't mention it, but I tend to have a little bit of a financial background as well. So I'm looking at the economics. Hey, if you're renting that ground, I'm not sure if you really want to be building up that ground if you're not going to be able to reap the benefits of it long term. So if that's rented ground, I think I'd be careful about getting too wild about putting a pile of fertilizer down.
Thanks, Aaron. And got another question here. Says, and it's from GG. Have you worked with copper-based fungicides? And if so, have you seen any response?
So here's your history lesson. Maybe GG already knows this. That the first fungicides on the market were actually something called Bordeaux mixture coming out of France, the Bordeaux region, and it was a copper-based, it was a copper sulfate-based product to work on grapes. I have worked with some copper fungicides, not in wheat, but more on the vegetable side, both for fungicide as well as for bactericide. Tomatoes have a group of diseases called the bacterial diseases. So we have bacterial speck, bacterial spot, and bacterial canker. And copper is really the only thing that we've got going for us. The challenge that you run into with copper-based fungicides is they are very protective in that they form a protective layer on the leaf, and they don't really penetrate inside the leaf. So I was talking about one of the things we want to test is copper deficiency, or not so much deficiency, we don't know if we have a deficiency, but copper response in wheat for the 2021 crop. And a foliar application with a copper-based fungicide is not going to get us there simply because that copper is not going to get into the leaf where it actually needs to do its thing. There are foliar copper products that you can use that does get into the plant, but they get pretty pricey. So yeah, that would be my complicated answer to not on wheat, but I do have a bunch of experience with it, and hopefully I didn't bore everyone with the little history lesson there.
Now, thanks, Aaron. The last question is, will this presentation be available to watch again? And the answer for that is yes. So all of our webinars we've ever hosted are on YouTube. So if you go to YouTube and search Deveron UAS in the search button, in the search tab up there, go to YouTube, search Deveron UAS, and just hit enter. You'll find our channel. And in the channel, then you'll see probably 5 different tabs. And if you click on the playlist tab, then you'll see 5 playlists, and one of those playlists is webinars. And so you can see all of our historical webinars posted there. And that's where we always put them up there, and they're free to share around, and please do share them around. And give us a comment anytime if you got some you like, or some you want us, if there's some there you want us to give a deeper dive into, absolutely. We'll jump in that.
Yeah, along with that, Scott, if someone wants to talk to any of us on the team about some of this stuff, reach out. The Deveron website, I really enjoy the Deveron website myself. There's a little chat bot there that when you stop by, it's going to start talking to you, and within about, well, what's the average turnaround time, Scott? You and your sales,
about 30 seconds. About
30 seconds from you starting to interact with that chatbot, you're going to be talking to someone real through that text system. So the sales folks can get you in touch with myself or with Scott or anyone else of our team. It's a lot of fun to have conversations. Some of the ideas that we come up with for testing comes from the people that we're working with. We absolutely love to brainstorm out ideas on, okay, this is an interesting theory, how are we going to test it? So yeah, that would be something I would mention. And then past webinars, a bunch of them have also been approved already for CEUs. So if you watch one of those, shoot me an email and say, hey, I watched the webinar on fungicides. Is it a good idea, or is it just wasting your money? And I'd like my CEUs for that. I'll get you taken care of on that. So.
Excellent. Thanks, Aaron. And I would like to thank all the attendees for joining us. This is why we're doing it. Again, I go back to increase the adoption rate of precision ag. We do that through education, and we freely share everything that we learn and everything that we're doing. So because you're joining us, we keep doing these, and we really appreciate the comments we get and the growth you guys all challenge us to have. With that, we'll have another webinar next week at the same time, same channel. We'll send out a new link because you have to register for a new link, but we'll send out an email and a social media again. The webinar next week is we'll engage soil sampling techniques, grid versus zone, and what we're getting out of different types of soil sampling techniques. And we'll also give a quick overview of a new tool that the data science team has developed called a variability capture tool, which is a free tool we've developed it's a web-based tool that helps agronomists talk with clients about the variability in their field. And it's quick and easy to use, and it's free, and it lets you demonstrate that there is actually variability in fields, and generally any field. So we'll demonstrate that too next week. With that, I appreciate everybody joining us, and I'll see you next time.